All right. It's that time again.
Yeah.
What laws were broken? There's only one way to find out. We have to do Lawless in Order with our good friend, attorney, David Lawless. David, how you doing?
What's up, listening world? I'm doing fantastic. The gavel David Lawless is ready to take over the professional wrestling world with shows coming back this July and forever.
Yes, and you're very busy in the courtroom as well.
A lot of good stuff happening here in Pittsburgh, working on a couple cool projects that are going to have some ramifications statewide and hopefully nationally. So everyone stay tuned and see what the gavel has in store. But like always, it will be flawless.
Oh, there we go. Now, glad that you can make some time for us today because our special guest is Raylan Caster from the Big Show. And Aaron and I were talking, we thought there's something missing, and that something is David. Because we need to talk about, when we talk about the Big Show, we got to talk about the highlight of Big Show's career and probably the spot in his career filled with the most criminal offenses.
Oh.
Show versus Big Boss Man from 1999. Most people are going to think to themselves, oh, it's just the car incident with the casket and his dad and everything. But there's so much more, David.
There's so much more to unravel in this timeline. And I guess the best way to introduce this would be for you guys to kind of explain a little bit of what happened in the backstory. But let me tell you that we've got some criminal and civil implications here, and it will conclude with quite possibly what I think is a little known but probably most egregious statute that exists in criminal law in Pennsylvania and probably throughout the country, which will save as a little surprise for your listeners at the end here. But I didn't think it could get worse than drugging someone and marrying yourself into their family or fighting over the custody of your child in a ladder match. But this is atrocious.
Yes, it is. It started on October 11th, 1999, when Big Show found out that his father was unfortunately terminally ill with cancer. Of course, later on that night, the Big Show had a scheduled match with the Big Boss Man, who proceeded to cut a tasteless promo against Big Show's dad. Do you remember this poem?
The poem?
Oh, the poem from the Big Boss Man. You don't remember it?
No, I do not.
Now it all started. He said something to the effect, with deepest regret and tears that are soaked, I'm sorry to hear your dad finally croaked. Something, eaten by worms, something about him being a bastard or something. It's really bad. I'll probably insert the audio just for hilarity purposes, but started out kind of in a very controversial way in which I don't think we would hear in 2020.
Yeah, I mean, so right off the bat, when he's basically giving a poem where he's saying that Big Show's dad died, you've got libel claims right there because that's a false statement that's made in public. You could say that that's intentional infliction of emotional distress by trying to say that, telling someone that their father's dead. But I would save that for the next event in this series, Greg, if you want to introduce that to the fans, because that's where you get into the real intentional infliction of emotional distress.
Okay, fair enough. At one point in this story, Big Boss Man paid a friend who dressed up and impersonated a police officer to tell the Big Show that his father officially died. This was before the actual poem was read and everything. This occurred actually on October 18th. So I think I actually got my timeline wrong, but so the poem might be later. This might just be a random tasteless promo from the Big Boss Man that he had on October 11th. But do you remember the incident in which the man impersonated an officer and then went to the Big Show to announce that his father had died?
Oh, yeah. So this is just full of a bevy of issues. So first of all, again, similar to how Triple H hired the bartender to drug Stephanie, you've got a conspiracy in the works because you have two actors here, which two actors are conspiring in an unlawful act. For the individual that was paid by the Big Boss Man, there is a crime known as impersonating a law enforcement officer, an officer of the government. That is not allowed because otherwise people would go around playing cops and acting like they could enter onto people's premises or detain people or ask them questions. Because this was two actors conspiring together, you could say that the Big Boss Man is also guilty of paying someone to impersonate a law enforcement official. But then again, the Big Boss Man's whole career, one could say he should have been arrested for pretending to be a law enforcement official.
That is very true.
You would have the intentional infliction of emotional distress because you are committing a tort against an individual, a tort being lying to the Big Show about his father passing away from cancer, which would cause at least emotional, if not physical, deterioration to the Big Show.
This is all awful, but it gets worse. Later that same night, after having a man impersonate a police officer, Big Boss Man stole a stopwatch from the Big Show's dad at the hospital and smashed it with a hammer. Apparently, it was a longtime family heirloom, and Big Boss Man just decided, I'm going to steal it and smash it. What's the repercussions of this?
So you have, well, depending on how he obtained it, right? So if he paid someone to go into the hospital and he had them steal the watch for him, then again, we've got a conspiracy. We've got burglary and theft. For Big Boss Man, he would actually be charged with receiving stolen property because he would actually know that the property was stolen. And then for the destruction of the property itself, you would have to go for really a civil case to get the money damages, but he may have to pay restitution to the court for the purposeful destruction of the property itself.
Whew. Well, it's not going to get much better because this sets Big Show off. He ends up snapping on October 28th, 1999, and he pushes a dumpster on top of a car that holds Big Boss Man and Albert inside. What happens? What happens to the Big Show in this case?
Okay, so first of all, so you have an assault and battery here. Okay, you have battery because there was an unlawful touching by an instrument of the Big Show. So it doesn't just, what people need to understand with a battery is it does not just have to be person-to-person contact. Okay, so if you are sitting on a horse and I have a cane and I strike the horse with that cane, that could be considered a battery because you set into motion a series of touching that could result in physical harm.
Ah.
So in that situation, if the boss man was actually harmed, then you would have a battery. An assault would come from the fear of injury associated with the Big Show rolling a dumpster onto the top of the car. I assume that there was a moonroof that the Big Boss Man could see said dumpster coming on top of him. Big Show would also, so in addition to those, you're talking about the Big Show taking personal private property and misappropriating it. He doesn't own that dumpster. That's probably on private property. It's probably some companies, someone's going to have to pay for it. Someone's going to have that moved.
For sure. It's just not a good situation. I don't have it in my timeline here, but at some point, Albert and Big Boss Man attack the Big Show while cutting a promo, trap him in a room, and throw tear gas into said room. Mm-hmm. What happens?
And they shut the door too.
They shut the door.
And they hold it so that Big Show can't get out.
He cannot get out.
So, I mean, again, you've got your battery charges, but now you've actually added in the charge of false imprisonment. So false imprisonment is when you unlawfully confine someone to a space without their ability for a method of ingress or egress. So false imprisonment can literally come in many different forms. It can come as something as clear as, locking someone in a room. It can also come in situations where a store or a manager tries to detain someone for suspicion of theft at the store. Sometimes you could even say it could come in a parking garage. So if a parking garage admits you access to the garage, but they don't give you a means to get out, that could be false imprisonment because you have no method of ingress or egress from the parking garage with your property. Now, all those legal analysts out there, don't message me and say that I got that wrong because that's a very extreme example that we use in law school. But in this case, clear false imprisonment.
You're so wise. I learned so much each and every time you're on here. This brings us to November 11th, 1990.
The climax. The climax.
The reason why we're here for this,
yep.
Big Show is holding a funeral for his father who officially passed away.
Which they announced in the ring on Monday Night Raw.
Which they announced on the ring on Monday Night Raw, which, by the way, before that poem that the Big Boss Man ends up saying after the Big Show's dad is announced as deceased, he interrupts the 10-bell salute, which I don't know if there's a crime for that in real life, but in wrestling, that's a big punishment. But November... No, go ahead.
That's the interrupting the 10-bell salute is the equivalent of kneeling during the national anthem in football.
Controversy all over. Woo! Yikes. So
yeah.
November 11th, Big Show's funeral is being held for his father, and the Big Boss Man decides to show up in a police vehicle with a giant bullhorn on top of it, interrupt, hook up the casket to his car, drive off, and Big Show thinks, well, I have to stop this. And so he grabs onto the casket as it's being dragged through the cemetery and proceeds to roll off. If you've ever seen The Rock take a stunner from Stone Cold Steve Austin, you would see what it looks like when Big Show rolls off this casket. A beardless Big Show, by the way, which looks ridiculous.
Hold on.
Yeah.
I'm going to pardon the interruption for a moment
Sure.
here. What was Big Show wearing?
Oh,
I want to say he was wearing like a leather outfit,
Like
leather,
black
leather
pants?
like leather.
Now,
black
what is a
pants.
crime for that? David? I
for
mean,
wearing that duster?
Yeah.
Well, you'd have to talk to the fashion police about that one.
okay.
Sorry. So, what crimes were committed during this funeral from the Big Boss?
Oh, first, let me just tell you that when we started this segment, I couldn't have imagined having to talk about this actual clip. But I've watched this clip thousands of times, and I've shown it to people that love wrestling and people that don't even know anything about wrestling. And the entertainment value of those 2.5 minutes, it's immeasurable. It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
So I don't want to say that I'm an expert in traffic control laws, okay? But we got to talk about a crime that happens before the clip even starts, and that's the ginormous bullhorn that the boss man attaches to the top of the car. First of all, that has to be violating some type of motor vehicle code, and it's amazing that he didn't get pulled over there. I mean, they pull over people for busted taillights. So can you imagine literally having like a second apartment complex on top of your car? Not to mention the noise violations that thing's going to perpetrate.
Sure.
Okay. So then you have him driving a police vehicle. So you have another instance of him impersonating a law enforcement or government official. Okay. And then on top of that, you don't necessarily have a crime for him interrupting the funeral. You could maybe say he was disturbing the peace, but that's a lesser misdemeanor that anyone's going to just wave off. This is the ultimate, the pinnacle of the crimes that can be committed against anyone in the history of wrestling. And I pulled up the statute in Pennsylvania because I want to make sure everyone understands it and I don't get it wrong. The statute, so it's something that we hear about in law school, but we never really know if it actually exists, right? It's one of those things where, hey, this is the law, but you probably will never encounter in your life. But the statute in Pennsylvania, and there's similar ones across the country, is called abuse of corpse. And the statute reads, except as authorized by law, a person who treats a corpse in a way that he knows would outrage ordinary family sensibilities commits a misdemeanor of the second degree. So we literally learn these laws in law school just to say, hey, this is on the books. I have never in my life encountered a case that has involved an abuse of a corpse where there's been criminal proceedings. This, you've got video evidence of the outrage that the family experiences. I mean, one of their family members decided to jump on the casket to try to save it. This is outlandish, and absolutely that would be the crime that the Big Boss Man would be guilty of because it's on video. I'm not sure what the penalty would be, but when you compound the fact that he had all these charges on top of it, I imagine he'd be looking at a pretty stiff mandatory minimum.
Wow. Who knew that was even an actual law?
Well, I think the only comeuppance, I guess, would be, and the way to settle this would be in a professional wrestling match on a pay-per-view. Is that,
Yeah.
that sounds like something that the judge would hand down as a sentence?
You know, if I ever find myself in an abusive corpse situation, that's going to be my first suggestion, that, Your Honor, rather than us go through the mundane judiciary and legal proceeding where a jury of your peers is supposed to adjudicate you, let's allow the community of our peers to pay money to watch us just beat the crap out of each other.
Yeah.
And whoever wins that is really the one who walks away victorious here.
Boy, I can't wait for Katie Vick.
Oh boy.
I'll tell you what, you guys better hope that someday I get elected to some type of judiciary appointment, because I'm going to turn the court system on its head.
Oh God. So obviously this whole storyline leads up to a match of epic proportions at Armageddon 1999 for the WWF Championship, which Big Show ends up winning after his father passed away at Survivor Series 1999. Big Boss Man versus Big Show, and of course a match with so much heat and so much animosity goes on to be an epic 3 minutes and 16 seconds, and Big Show retains the WWF Championship. Now, before we get there, though, there was one more thing that occurred that I feel like there's some sort of crime involved with. Again, I don't have an exact date on my timeline. I think it's after Big Show's father passes away. Big Boss Man, we don't end up figuring out how he got inside. I think we're led to believe that he's just let in, but he goes inside the home of the Big Boss Man's mother. And
of the Big Show's mother.
Thank
Too
you.
many bigs.
Too many bigs in here. Big Boss Man goes inside the Big Show's mother's house, has a cameraman secretly placed outside to record this incident occurring, where he's basically having her say on footage without realizing that Big Show is in fact a bastard. And so then Boss Man looks in the camera and makes sure to tell her that there's a hidden camera outside and says, Big Show, you're a bastard and your mama said so. Is there some sort of crime for this?
Sure. So first of all, let's talk about the invasion of privacy. Okay, so invasion of privacy can be criminal and civil, but it occurs when you are depicted or photographed in some type of light that you didn't consent to. And especially this being on private property, that would be a situation where clearly Big Show's mom would have had her privacy invaded. Now, the other thing that I want your listeners to understand, and I think this is interesting to bring up in light of some of the things that have been going on in wrestling, but just because you may get someone to agree to something under a false pretense, once those circumstances change, if you do make something affirmatively known to an individual, it can morph into a crime. What I mean is, let's say the Big Boss Man knocked on the door and said, hey, I got some Girl Scout cookies I want to sell to you. Do you mind if I come in? He comes in. Obviously, that wouldn't be a trespass criminally or civilly at that point because she welcomed him into the home. But at some point, once the Big Show or once the Boss Man makes it clear that he's not there to sell Girl Scout cookies and he's there to try to get Big Show's mom to admit that he's a bastard, once she figures that out and she says to him, get off my property, that's when it becomes a criminal trespass. So right there, you've got criminal trespass and invasion of privacy. Now, assuming that he was arrested for any of the traffic violations, for impersonating an officer, or for the abuse of corpse, that would also be a parole violation. And I would have to imagine that some restraining order would have been implemented. I mean, I know that after I got done fighting someone for the honor of my father after they ruined his funeral, I would want to put a restraining order against him so he doesn't go to my mother's house unexpectedly, because there's no lengths the Big Boss Man won't go to.
So, all things considered, if you were to put this all together under one umbrella, he's going to get charges pressed against him in court. What do you think the maximum penalty is going to be for something as ridiculous as the Big Boss Man has done criminally?
Well, man, I mean, a lot of the, the false imprisonment and all of that, those are lesser crimes. I don't know what a second-degree misdemeanor for abuse of a corpse would be. Whatever the state's mandatory minimum would be, and whatever state it happened in, really. But again, you've got an implication of federal law because these crimes are happening in different states,
Sure.
Right? And so if he took that corpse over interstate lines, now it's a federal abuse of corpse claim.
That's true. We don't know how far he got with that corpse.
Yeah, I mean, look, I know
there's filmed in different cities.
The one thing we haven't really addressed though is, we talk about the laws in the United States, but this is all happening in the WWE universe. I haven't seen any constitution or codification of WWE universe laws. I would imagine that the first one is, if someone commits a crime against you, the only way to determine who the rightful victor in this matter is to have a match.
Yep.
It only makes sense.
But I would imagine that you'd be looking at between 5 to at least 20 years. Maybe some house arrest, definitely some parole, definitely some anger management and some counseling too. I mean, you would probably have to undergo some pretty heavy psychiatric screening to determine whether or not you're you have all of your faculties about you. If you decide that you're going to put a big bullhorn on top of your car and you're going to go to a funeral and break it up, I mean, I would have to imagine his license would be suspended also, because clearly driving's a privilege, not a right. And you cannot operate vehicles willy-nilly like that. How did that car even pass inspection? Okay.
I have no idea. David, would you say that Big Boss Man, between the incident we're talking about with the Big Show, the incident with Al Snow and Pepper, and the accusations brought upon him by Nails and the beatings that occurred back in the late 80s or early 90s, depending on when Nails was, held in incarceration.
Yeah.
Do you think Big Boss Man is the most despicable professional wrestler in the history of the industry?
I would say from a criminal standpoint, he's the most ironic, because he's supposed to be someone that's entrusted with upholding the law. And it's funny that you would ask
that goes right now.
Well, I was going to say, it's perfect that you would ask that question at this time, because you have all these movements to get better police training and defund the police across the country. And if you look at the Big Show as an example, he's the biggest offender, someone that's in power going against the laws. That's like having a lawyer who calls himself lawless. See what I did there? See what I did there?
You brought it full circle.
Hold on,
All comes full circle.
Let me ask you this. We talked about how bad the Boss Man was.
Yeah.
What's the penalty for Big Show putting a dumpster onto poor little old Albert and Big Boss Man? Just because he got
Albert's he's an unnecessary casualty in all of this. Right. I guess, Albert would have causes of action against the Big Show too, but if we're looking on balance between the Big Show and the Big Boss Man, I mean, Greg, you hit the nail right on the head here. He is the most despicable character in the history of professional wrestling. And I mean, we've had people talk about, the biological paternity of their kids. I mean, we talked about a guy who drugged someone into becoming his wife. But I mean, does it get any worse than going to someone's funeral and literally having their son like wakeboard on their dad's casket?
I don't think it does. I mean, unless, of course, as you alluded to, if you decide to, have sex with a corpse, and that's pretty.
Ooh, well, I mean, that's bad. But I think actually, if you go back, that's one of the charges that was brought against Jeffrey Dahmer.
Oh yeah, I guess because what he was like.
Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy. I'm sorry.
Ted Bundy. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it was one of the charges brought against Ted Bundy.
Ugh. Morbid stuff.
Wow.
So it's like Big Boss Man, Ted Bundy.
Wow, what a chain of command.
Yeah.
Hey, I thank you for joining us again for doing this, and let everyone know where they can find you on social media if they want to contact you for some legal advice.
Absolutely. So first and foremost, fans and listeners, we want to hear from you. What storylines or angles in professional wrestling history, in all of history, do you want to hear us break down on Lawless in Order? Because this has been probably one of the most enjoyable activities that I've done in my wrestling/legal career. And I don't know that it can get more ridiculous than the abuse of corpse statute, but guess what? I'm sure there's someone out there that could figure out something that we need to talk about. As a professional wrestler, you want to hit me up on Facebook at The Gavel David Lawless Esquire, Instagram Gavel David Lawless, Twitter Gavel Lawless, and for those out in listening land that want to watch the Gavel David Lawless socially distant in the comfort of their own home, go to iwcwrestling.com and you can check out the Gavel David Lawless on July 11th in the first professional wrestling show taking place in Pennsylvania. And I will be alongside my regulator partners, Officer Dan Murphy, the Silver Bullet / heir apparent Chris LaRusso, and a buddy from Ohio, the GOAT, Jock Sampson.
Oh,
sounds like a good time.
I love Jock.
I am the consigliere of the regulators, so as I am the consigliere to this show. But professionally, if you want to hit me up, maxpetrunyapc.com, here to answer any of your legal questions. If anyone does have any legitimate or illegitimate questions about the law, I'm always available to address those with the fans out there. So, Greg, thank you so much again. Aaron, thank you so much again for the opportunity. This is truly one of the most enriching and rewarding things I've done as a professional wrestler. So thank you very much. And thank all of your listeners. I see our numbers are climbing in Scandinavia.
We're climbing all over, brother, and we can't do it without you.
Hey, one thing we need to do is we need to start talking about Steve Austin angles too, so we can start to get him to listen to the podcast as well.
Yeah,
he's a listener.
He's broke some laws, that's for sure.
Hey,
Oh,
I'm
yeah,
gonna say one thing real quick. Remember Ric Flair being called the dirtiest player in the game?
absolutely.
Okay, because he pulled the trunks on a pin, or he
Yeah.
may have raked an eye or something like that. He
Just
doesn't even
terrible.
compare to the boss man, does he?
I'm telling you what, you want to see bad, it's showing up to someone's funeral, let alone the promo that he cuts right before he hooks the casket up, right? Where he basically says to the Big Show's mom, I'm going to have sex with you and show you what a real man is like.
He did, in fact.
I think it's something like he's got the megaphone. He's like, oh, hey, Miss White, why don't you just come to my hotel tonight? I'll show you what a real man is. And then I think he actually says the line, don't worry, Big Show, I won't make you call me daddy.
I'm pretty sure he does say that, actually. Jesus God.
Which is a line that I like to use anytime I face someone and I see their mom in the crowd.
Oh, boy. Well,
So thank you, Big Boss Man. Rest in peace.
yes, rest in peace indeed, and rest in peace for this segment. Until next time, David, thank you as always.
Thank you, guys.